The three brothers were left behind, but Sahadeva managed to free himself and snatch the sword Kosika from Jatishura's grasp. Yudhishthira addressed Jatishura, "O stupid one, your merit decreases with each act of thine. Do you not pay heed to the established order of nature, whether belonging to the human race or to the lower orders? All pay regard to virtue." But Jatishura was beyond reason. He continued to carry off the Pandavas, taunting Yudhishthira and his brother thus. They were being dragged away. Nakula and Sahadeva urged their brothers to fight back. What can be more meritorious for a Kshatriya than to fall in battle or defeat? Of course Sahadeva asked, but Yudhishthira cautioned them, saying, "The mighty armed son of the wind god may not be far away, and on Vema, coming up at the next moment, the Rakshasa will not live." Just then Vema appeared on the scene, his mace in hand like Vasava, wielding the thunderbolt. He saw his brothers and Draupadi being carried off, and was filled with wrath. "I had found you out for a wicked wight from your scrutiny of our weapons," he said to Jatishura. "But as I had no apprehension of you, so I had not slain you at that time." Vema forbade his brothers from fighting, saying, "Witness, I am more than a match for this Rakshasa," and with a fierce determination in his eyes, he rushed towards Jatishura. The two engaged in a dreadful wrestling match, their bodies locked in a struggle that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth as they clashed. Yudhishthira's words echoed through the air once more. "By committing the self to this deed, thou hast swallowed up the hook fastened to the line of fate." And indeed Jatishura was no match for Vema. He stumbled and fell, his wicked intentions foiled by the mighty strength of the Pandavas. As the Rakshasa was slain, Yudhishthira, the royal son of Kunti, returned to the hermitage of Narayana and began to dwell there. He had spent 4 years in peace, roaming the woods with his brothers Arjuna and Manakula and Sahadeva, as well as their wife Draupadi. But now, remembering his brother's promise, Yudhishthira summoned them all and said, "It has been appointed by Vivats that about the 5th year he will come to Sweta, the excellent cliff, where festivities are held by blooming plants and maddened kokpaus, black bees, peacocks, chatakas, and inhabited by tigers, boars, buffaloes, gavias, deer, and ferocious beasts. We must repair thither, for we eagerly anxious of meeting him." On his arrival, Yudhishthira explained to the others that Arjuna had appointed 5 years for himself to learn military. Since abroad he would be arriving at Sweta after having obtained the weapons. The Pandavas summoned the Brahmanas and went around them, pleasing them with their presence. The Brahmanas gave their assent, saying, "This shall be attended by prosperity and welfare for most of the Bharatas. These troubles shall result in happiness with the Brahmanas' blessing." Yudhishthira set out with his brothers, and Draupadi followed by the Rakshasas and protected by Lomasa. They journeyed on foot at times and were carried by the Rakshasas at others. King Yudhishthira apprehended many troubles as they proceeded towards the north, abounding in lions, tigers, and elephants. On the 17th day they reached the sacred slopes of the Himalayas, not far from Ganamadana, and his son beheld on the sacred slopes a holy hermitage surrounded by blossoming trees growing near cascades. The royal sage Vrishaparva received them with affection, even as his own sons. The repressors of foes spent 7 nights in the hermitage, duly regarded. When the 8th day came, they prepared to start on their journey. Yudhishthira entrusted Vrishaparva with their remaining robes and left behind their sacrificial vessels, ornaments, and jewels. The wise sage gave instructions unto them as unto his own sons. With Vrishaparva's permission, the high-souled ones set out towards the north. As they departed, the magnanimous Vrishaparva followed them to a certain distance. Then, having entrusted the Pandavas unto the care of the Brahmanas, and instructed and blessed them, Vrishaparva retraced his steps. Yudhishthira with his brothers began to proceed. As Yudhishthira and his brothers Krisha, Emma, and the twins Nakula and Sahadeva approached the wise sage Arstishna on the sacred mountain, they were met with a mixture of curiosity and caution. The sage's eyes sparkled with a deep understanding as he beheld the sons of Pandu, their faces etched with the weight of their journey greetings. "The little ones," Arstishna said, his voice low and soothing, "I have been expecting you. Please sit with me." As they settled around him, Dalmia, their wise priest, arrived and paid homage to the sage. Arstishna's eyes twinkled as he acknowledged Dalmia's presence, for he had already discerned the identity of these illustrious visitors. The sage turned his attention back to Yudhishthira, asking a series of probing questions. "Do you turn your heart towards virtue? Do you honor your elders and those learned in the Vedas? Have you abandoned sinful ways? And do you know how to perform meritorious deeds?" Yudhishthira's responses were confident and sincere, assuring Arstishna that he had indeed dedicated himself to a life of righteousness. They conversed. The air was filled with an otherworldly music, the sweet sounds of kettle drums, tabours, shells, and writings carried on the breeze. Arstishna's words wove a spell of enchantment around them. You will hear these melodies while you stay here, but do not be tempted to venture beyond this place. It is the domain of the gods, where mortals dare not tread. The sage's warnings were tinged with a hint of warning, for he knew that those who ventured too far would face the wrath of the Rakshasas and their ferocious darts. Yet as he spoke, his eyes shone with a deep affection for these young warriors who had come to him, seeking wisdom. Stay here a while, Arstishna said, and enjoy the fruits of this sacred land. Partake in the food of the monist, and let your spirits soar on the wings of music and song. You will find marvels beyond your wildest dreams. The Amors, Kimpurushas, the Gandharvas, and Apsaras, the Nagas and Suparnas, all gathered here to celebrate the Parvas. Yudhishthira and his brothers listened in rapt attention. Arstishna's words painted a vivid tapestry of wonder and enchantment. They knew that they had entered a realm beyond their mortal understanding, a place where the very fabric of reality was woven with magic and mystery. And so unto the sages Gedans, Yudhishthira and his brothers settled into this sacred land, ready to immerse themselves in its wonders. The sun was setting on the majestic Himalayan mountains, casting a warm orange glow over the serene landscape. Janim Jaya, eager to hear tales of his ancestors' bravery, asked Vaisampayana to recount the story of how his great-grandfathers, the Pandavas, had dwelled in the Gandhamadana mountain. Vaisampayana began by telling of how the Pandavas, led by Bhimasena and Arjuna, had received advice from Arstishna, a wise sage who lived on the mountain. They took this counsel to heart and began to live simply, eating fruits, honey, and deer meat killed with unpoisoned arrows. As they spent their days in contemplation, Lomas, a divine sage, would visit them and regale them with tales of oldest. The months passed. Ghatakika, the son of Bhima, and his Rakshasas army departed, leaving the Pandavas to enjoy the peaceful mountain retreat. But their serenity was soon disrupted by a sudden commotion. A mighty Naga living in the nearby lake had been carried off by Suparna, a divine bird. The mountain trembled, and trees crashed to the ground as the creatures of the forest watched in awe. As the Pandavas looked on, the wind began to blow, carrying with it fragrant flowers from the mountain's peak. Among them was Bhima, who sat majestically on the mountain, his presence radiating strength and power. Krishna approached him, saying, Bhimasa, let all the Rakshasas flee from this mountain, for I have long desired to behold its summit protected by your mighty arms. From his eyes flashed with anger, and he felt censured by Draupadi's words. He took up his bow sword and mass, rushing towards the cliff like a maddened elephant. The creatures of the forest watched as he ascended the rugged path, his strength unyielding despite exhaustion or fatigue. At last Bhima reached the summit, where he beheld the palace of Vaisravana, the lord of treasures. He stood in awe, describing the golden crystal palaces, surrounded by walls made of precious gems. The air was filled with music from various trees, and delaying damsels danced around him. As Bhima gazed upon the palace, a breeze carried perfumes and balmy scents through the air. The Rakshasas and Yakshas who had been living in the mountain shadow began to stir. Manaman, a mighty Rakshasa, emerged from the shadows holding darts, and massive battle between Bhima and the Rakshasas was fierce and intense. Bhima wielded his bow with incredible strength, cutting down their darts and piercing the bodies of the roaring Rakshasas. In the heart of the mountain a sullen silence had fallen. The sound of distant roars and thunderous echoes came from within the caves. But Bhima, Kuntai's brave son, was nowhere to be found. His companions, including Ajatasattu, the twin sons of Madrai, Krishna, Dharmiya, and all the Brahmanas, grew anxious with every passing moment. As the sun began to set, they entrusted Draupadi to Arstishna's care and equipped themselves for battle. The mighty charioteers, armed and ready, ascended the mountain summit, their hearts pounding with anticipation. Upon reaching the top, they beheld a scene of utter devastation. Bhima lay unconscious, his body battered by the Rakshasas he had fought. As the Pandavas rushed to their brother's side, they saw the fallen Rakshasas strewn about, their masses and swords scattered on the ground. The air was heavy with the scent of blood and sweat. Yudhishthira, ever vigilant, approached Bhima and gently shook him awake. Bhima, he said, his voice laced with concern, what have you done? You've committed a grave sin as one who leads an ascetic life. This slaughter without cause is unlike you. We must consider the consequences of our actions. Bhima's eyes fluttered open, and he sat up, his gaze scanning the horizon. He saw the Rakshasas' bodies, his own mask still clutched in his hand, and the concern etched on his brother's face as the surviving Rakshasas, having fled from Bhima's wrath, reached Kivrazabad in a state of panic. They recounted their tale to the Lord of Treasures, describing how one mortal had single-handedly slaughtered their kin. Kivra's face darkened with anger as he summoned his charioteers and prepared for battle. As the Ichas and Gandharvas arrived on the mountain summit, they were met with a sight that filled them with wonder. Bhima stood tall, his mask still in hand, while Yudhishthira and his brothers surrounded him. Kivra's eyes widened as he beheld the Pandavas, their bravery and strength evident for all to see. The Lord of Treasures approached Bhima, a mixture of emotions on his face, a child, O best of the Kuras. He said, I do not mind this deed, for you have committed it in the service of Krishna. Your strength has freed me from a terrible curse, one that Agastya had placed upon me in anger. Yudhishthira's curiosity was piqued, and he asked Kivra to explain the reason behind his curse. The Lord of Treasures began to recount the tale of two Zastalai, where, as the sun rose over the horizon, Dhamya, accompanied by Arshishna, arrived at the Pandavas' camp. The two Brahmanas bowed down to the feet of Arshishna, and Dhamya then joined hands in reverence to all the other Brahmanas present. Dhamya took Yudhishthira's right hand and began to speak, his eyes fixed on the east. O mighty monarch, he said, this king of mountains, Mandara, stretches across the earth, covering it up to the Asin. Indra and Vaisravana preside over this sacred land blessed with woods, forests, and mountains. As Dhanya spoke his words, painted a vivid picture in Yudhishthira's mind. He described how the twice-born ones, sages versed in duty, citizenais, and celestials, all paid homage to the rising sun. From this very point beyond this region, Dhamya continued, lies Sanyamana, the abode of Yamad, king of the departed spirits. This sacred land is called Asta, and it's a place where prime prosperity reigns supreme. He spoke of the sun, who ever remains true to his nature, and Varan, the protector of all creatures, who resides within Mandara. Dhamya then described the Mahamru, a mountain that shone like a beacon in the northern regions. It was here that Brahma's court resided, where Prajapati had created all mobile and immobile beings. The seven mind-born sons of Brahma, including Dakshat, dwelled within its auspicious and healthy confines. As Dhamya spoke of the celestial rishis with Vasishta at their head, Yudhishthira's eyes widened in wonder. He beheld the bright summit of Meru, where Brahma sat alongside happy celestials who had achieved self-knowledge. Dhamya's words painted a picture of Narayana, the prime lord and origin of all creatures, whose realm lay beyond the reach of even the gods, and Danavas. The region was resplendent with its native splendor, shining like the sun or fire. Yudhishthira felt an overwhelming sense of awe as he listened to Dhamya's description. The sage continued to speak of Narayana's realm, where luminaries couldn't shine in comparison to his transcendental light. It was here that, yet as inspired by virtue and pious practices, attained the universal soul, the self-create and eternal God. Gods. Yudhishthira listened intently as Dhamya explained how the sun and moon coursed around Meru each day, influencing created things with their unceasing motion. The sun withdrew energy from all beings only to render it back. The day had passed like any other for Arjuna's companions, their minds preoccupied with thoughts of him. But little did they know a sudden arrival was about to change everything. Mahendra's chariot, yoked to horses that shone like lightning, burst onto the scene, its presence almost blinding. Driven by Matalai, the chariot illuminated the sky like tongues of fire or a blazing meteor, and Karatai, Arjuna's elder brother, sat within it, resplendent in garlands and new-made ornaments. As the chariot came to rest on the mountain Dhananjaya, Arjuna himself alighted, his beauty blazing like a radiant sun. He approached the mountain, bowing down at the feet of Dhamya, Ajatasattu, and Drakadara. Before finally meeting with Krishna, the reunion was joyous, with all parties delighted to see each other. Karatai then stood before Arjuna in a humble guise, and upon meeting him, they were overjoyed. Karatai began to eulogize their brother, praising his virtues and accomplishments. As they stood together, the Partha's eyes fell upon Matalai's chariot, which had brought them all together. They went around it in reverence, paying homage to its driver as if he were a god himself. The magnanimous brothers then offered worship to Matalai, expressing their gratitude for his presence. Karatai asked after the health of the gods, and Matalai replied, sharing words of wisdom with them. Before departing, Matalai instructed the Parthas as one would instruct sons, and then ascended back into the heavens in his incomparable chariot. As Matalai vanished from sight, Arjuna turned to his companions and began to recount his adventures in heaven. He spoke of how he had learned the arts of war from Sakra, Deva and Siva, and how all the gods had been pleased with him due to his good behavior and dedication. The brothers sat entranced by Kirita's tales. Their eyes shining with wonder as night began to fall. Arjuna settled down to rest alongside his nephews, the sons of Madri. Though they were weary from their journey, their hearts remained full of joy knowing that their beloved brother had returned to them once more. As the night wore on, Arjuna, along with his brothers, paid their respects to Yudhishthira, the just king. The air was filled with an otherworldly energy as the sounds of celestial music and the rumble of chariot wheels echoed through the air. The beasts of prey and birds let out a cacophony of cries, as if they too were witnessing something extraordinary. As the brothers stood in reverence, a dazzling procession emerged from the heavens. Hosts of Gandharvas and Apsaras, resplendent in their golden cars, followed the mighty Indra, king of the gods. His chariot, yoked with steeds that shone like clouds, thundered towards the Pandavas. The air was electric with anticipation as Indra, blazing with beauty, descended from his chariot and stood before the brothers. Yudhishthira's eyes widened in awe as he beheld the high-souled king. With reverence he approached Indra, accompanied by his brothers. In accordance with the ancient traditions, Yudhishthira worshipped Indra, acknowledging his immeasurable power and dignity. Arjuna, still bearing the marks of his ascetic life, stood before Indra with a humble demeanor like a devoted servant. As Indra gazed upon Arjuna's clotted hair, he was filled with joy. The king of the gods smiled upon Yudhishthira, who had sensed the purity and devotion emanating from his brother by worshipping Indra. Yudhishthira experienced an unparalleled sense of bliss. Indra, pleased with the Pandava, spoke to Yudhishthira in a voice that was like thunder. "You shall rule over the earth, O Pandava," he declared. "May you be blessed. Return once more to Kamika." With these words, Indra's presence vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving behind an era of divine energy. The brothers stood in stunned silence. They knew that their lives would never be the same. The encounter with Indra was a reminder of their destiny and the great deeds that lay ahead for them. And those who listened to this tale of Sakra's meeting with the Pandavas would live a life free from disturbances, enjoying happiness and peace for 100 years. The wise one Vasapana smiled as he finished recounting the story. He knew that the words of Indra still resonated within their hearts, guiding them towards their noble goals. The memory of this sacred encounter would stay with the Pandavas forever, illuminating their path and inspiring them to greatness. In the realm of the gods, Arjuna had been sent on a mission by King Yudhishthira, but he had failed to accomplish his task. As he returned to earth, he was met with curiosity and admiration from his brother, who asked him about his experiences in heaven. Arjuna recounted his journey, telling of how he had traveled to the forest, where he met a wise Brahmana who guided him on his path. The sage advised Arjuna to perform severe penances, promising that he would soon behold the Lord of the gods. With determination, Arjuna embarked on this spiritual quest, subsisting on fruits and roots for a month, then water alone, before abstaining from food altogether. As he stood in meditation, the fearsome creature emerged, taking the form of a boar, its body growing larger with each passing moment. A mighty hunter followed close behind, armed with bow and arrows, accompanied by his retinue of female attendants. Arjuna drew his own bow and quiver, unleashing a hail of arrows that struck true, but the creature absorbed them all. The battle raged on, with Arjuna firing arrow after arrow, each one being swallowed up by the beast. Undeterred, he employed more powerful weapons, including those wielded by the gods themselves, Stanakarna, Varuna, Salava, and Asmavarsha. But these two were consumed by the creature's insatiable hunters. The fight continued. Arjuna fixed the mighty wind god's bow to his own, but still he could not vanquish the beast. It was only when he unleashed the Brahmastra, a divine arrow imbued with the power of creation itself, that the creature began to grow in size and strength. The world trembled as the energy released by the Brahmastra threatened to consume everything in its path. But even this powerful weapon proved ineffective against the creature's unyielding might. Arjuna was left stunned and fearful until he realized that he must confront his foe with physical force rather than magic. As the two locked horns, their blows shaking the earth, Arjuna fell to the ground, defeated by the sheer power of his opponent. It was only when the creature vanished along with its female companion that Mahadeva, the god of destruction and transformation, reappeared in a new form, with Yuva, the goddess of love and devotion, standing by his side. Mahadeva wielded the panik, a mighty trident capable of assuming many forms. He praised Arjuna's courage and determination, saying that he was well pleased with him. The god then returned to Arjuna the bow and quiver he had taken and offered him a boon. Arjuna requested to learn all the divine weapons wielded by Mahadeva himself, and so the god granted him the mighty Pez. The sun had set on the Himalayas, casting a warm orange glow over the landscape. Arjuna, the great warrior, stood at the base of the mountain reflecting on the events that had transpired during his night there. As he performed his morning rituals, he spotted a Brahmana who resembled the sun in stature and radiance. The two men exchanged stories, and the Brahmana revealed to Arjuna that he had been chosen by the great god Shiva, also known as Trambika, to behold the divine Mahadeva. Arjuna's eyes widened with wonder as the Brahmana spoke of his encounter with the Supreme Soul. He listened intently as the wise man shared tales of the gods and their celestial realm. As they conversed, a gentle breeze began to blow, carrying the sweet scent of fresh flowers that bloomed in every direction. The air was filled with enchanting melodies and hymns praising Indra, the king of the gods. Suddenly a procession of divine beings emerged from the horizon. Hima, the god of death, sat on his chariot accompanied by Varuna, the lord of the sea, and other celestial deities. They welcomed Arjuna with open arms, acknowledging him as one of their own. The Lokapalas, guardians of the world, presented Arjuna with mighty weapons, imbuing him with divine powers. Arjuna accepted the gifts from the gods. He felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and awe. Indra, the thousand-eyed king, revealed himself to Arjuna, saying that he had been chosen for a greater purpose. The Lord of the Celestials declared that Arjuna would have to return to his mortal form, but would soon be called upon to fulfill a crucial task. Vasalai, the chariot driver of Indra, arrived on the scene bearing an exquisite celestial car yoked with majestic steeds. As they ascended into the heavens, Matalai marveled at Arjuna's calm demeanor, saying that even the gods themselves were jarred by the speed of their chariot. They soared through the realms of the celestials, witnessing breathtaking sights and marveling at the divine Habadazan, the city of Amaravati, the capital of Indra's kingdom. Arjuna beheld wonders beyond his wildest imagination. He saw the radiant gardens, the lakes fragrant with lotus flowers, and the trees bearing fruit that granted every desire. The air was filled with sweet melodies, and the ground shone with the kaleidoscope of gemsas. They entered the city. Arjuna met the Vasas, the Rudras, and other celestial beings who bestowed their blessings upon him. They granted him strength, prowess, and victory in battle. With his heart full of joy and wonder, Arjuna stood before Indra, who offered him half of his seat as a symbol of respect. In this, as Arjuna continued to recount his tale, he spoke of a moment when he beheld the majestic Ocean, an inexhaustible lord of waters. The waves crashed against the shore like mighty cliffs, meeting and rolling away in a never-ending dance. The sound of the surf was accompanied by the sight of thousands of ships filled with precious gems, their sails billowing in the wind. As Arjuna gazed upon this wondrous scene, he noticed creatures unlike any he had ever seen before. Tortoises and makers like underwater mountains swam through the waves. The Ocean floor was dotted with shells that shone like stars on a clear night, their beauty only partially hidden by the swirling water, and amidst it all a violent wind whipped up whirlpools of foam, creating a spectacle that left Arjuna in awe. As he stood there drinking in the majesty of the Ocean, his eyes chanced upon the city of the demons, filled with the Danavas. The air was thick with malevolent energy, and Arjuna knew that he had to tread carefully. Matalai, skilled charioteer that he was, took the reins of Arjuna's chariot and urged it forward, rattling the gates of the demon city with a force that sent shivers down its inhabitants' spines. The Danavas, thinking Arjuna to be the lord of the celestials himself, were thrown into a state of panic. They grasped their bows and arrows, swords and javelins, ready to defend their stronghold against the perceived invader. But as they prepared for battle, Matalai's chariot continued its relentless pace, forcing the Danavas to seal their gates and bar themselves within. Undeterred by this challenge, Arjuna took up his shelled Vedanta and let out a mighty roar that shook the firmament. The echoes of the sound sent tremors through the land, causing even the bravest of warriors to cower in fear as the Danavas trembled within their gates. The Navatakavaka's offspring of Ditai emerged from the shadows, donning their armor and grasping their deadly weapons. The air was electric with tension as Arjuna's chariot, guided by Matalai's skilled hands, bore down on the demon's city. The Danavas unleashed a cacophony of discordant sounds from their musical instruments, but even these were drowned out by the thunderous roar of Arjuna's conch shell as the battle raged on. Fish by the hundreds and thousands fled in terror, while demons discharged arrow after arrow at Arjuna. Conflict was fierce, with neither side giving quarter. But as the fight reached its climax, the Devarshes, Danavarshas, Brahmarshas, and Siddhas arrived on the scene, their voices raised. The battle raged on, with Arjuna facing off against the formidable Naivetakavakas, a legion of demons, equipped with an arsenal of arms and armor. As he rode into combat, his chariot was suddenly surrounded by these mighty warriors, their charioteers shouting loudly as they unleashed a hail of arrows that threatened to overwhelm him. The air was filled with the sound of clashing steel and the whirring of arrows as Arjuna's enemies closed in on all sides. He could feel the weight of their blows, but he refused to yield. With a fierce determination burning within him, he drew his Gandavat bow and began to unleash a torrent of swift and deadly arrows that pierced each of his opponents. With 10 precise shots, the Naivetakavakas were driven back by Arjuna's unyielding onslaught, their ranks broken as they stumbled backward under the relentless barrage. But even as they retreated, new waves of demons emerged from the fray, armed with clubs and darts that they hurled at Arjuna. With the first city that seemed almost for all the battle-scared steeds that Matalai had yoked to Arjuna's chariot galloped forward with a speed that was nothing short of miraculous. They trampled the enemy beneath their hooves, sending Naivetakavakas flying as they went. The sound of clashing steel and the pounding of hooves filled the air as Arjuna's chariot sliced through the ranks of his enemies like a hot knife through butter. As the battle raged on, it seemed as though the very fabric of reality was being torn apart by the sheer force of will that Arjuna brought to bear. His arrows flew true and swift, cutting down demons by the hundreds as they tried to close in on him. The Naivetakavakas fought back with all their might, but Arjuna's prowess was unmatched. Even as he cut through his enemies like a scythe through wheat, Arjuna's mind began to feel the weight of the battle's toll. But Matalai, the charioteer of Sekar, stood by him, guiding the steeds with an ease that bordered on the miraculous. Together they seemed almost invincible. The fight wore on. It became clear that Arjuna was not just fighting to win, he was fighting to prove himself worthy of his own legion. And in this moment of supreme test, he found within him a reservoir of strength and determination that seemed to know no bounds. With each passing moment, his arrows flew faster and deadlier, cutting down Naivetakavakas by the hundreds as they tried to close in on him. In the end, it was not just Arjuna's skill with arms that won the day. It was his unyielding willpower, his refusal to yield, even when all seemed lost. As the sun beat down upon Arjuna's armor as he stood before the mighty army of Asuras, the air was electric with tension, and the sound of clashing steel echoed through the landscape. Suddenly a hail of massive rocks came crashing down from above, each one the size of a tree trunk. The impact shook the earth beneath Arjuna's feet, and he raised his Gandavat bow to face the onslaught with swift precision. Arjuna unleashed a barrage of arrows that flew like thunderbolts, striking true and shattering the rocks into dust. But even as the rock debris dissipated, a new threat emerged, a torrent of water that cascaded down from the sky. Its currents, powerful enough to rival an actual, the deluge was so intense that it obscured everything in sight, leaving Arjuna disoriented and bewildered. As he struggled to regain his bearings, Matalai, the charioteer, cried out in terror, "Where are you, Partha?" His voice was laced with fear as he clung to the reins of the steeds. Arjuna tried to reassure him, but even he felt a creeping sense of dread. The den of his masters of illusion seemed to be manipulating the very fabric of reality. Matalai's words sent a shiver down Arjuna's spine. "I have seen battles between gods and demons, where the fight of the universe hung in the balance, and I have witnessed the destruction of Sambhara, Vritra, and other mighty foes, but never before have I seen such chaos and confusion." The charioteer's words were laced with a sense of foreboding. "The Great Father has ordained the destruction of all creatures. This battle cannot be for any other purpose." Arjuna steeled himself against Matalai's fear, drawing upon his own inner strength to calm the charioteer. He vowed to dispel the illusions that shrouded him and to vanquish the Danava's dark magic. With a fierce determination, Arjuna conjured up an illusion of his own, an army of arms that seemed to stretch on forever, capable of bewildering even the most powerful foes. But the Danavas were relentless, and their illusions continued to shift, and with the like living serpents, the world itself seemed to be torn apart with darkness, and light vying for dominance. Arjuna's steeds reared up in terror as Meteli cried out once more, "Where are you, Partha?" But this time Arjuna was ready with a deep breath. He focused his mind and unleashed a fierce counterattack against the Navakevakas, sending them tumbling into the realm of Yama. The battle raged on, with Arjuna's Gandava ball firing arrow after arrow in a blur of motion. But even as Arjuna stood on the battlefield, he gazed out at the deities who had begun to fight. In secret, invisible to the naked eye, they wielded illusion as their only. But Arjuna was not one to be fooled. He drew his Gandava bow and began to fire arrow after arrow, each one striking its mark with deadly precision. The shafts sliced through the air, severing the heads of the deities. Wherever they stood, the battle raged on, with Arjuna fighting valiantly against the invisible foe. But as he clashed with the Navakevakas, he began to notice that their illusion was growing stronger by the minute. The ground beneath his feet seemed to grow uneven, and rocks began to fall from the sky like a hail of boulders. Arjuna's horses faltered, unable to find room to move in the midst of the chaos. Just as it seemed that all hope was lost, Meteli, the charioteer, spoke up, his voice calm and reassuring. "Arjuna, do not be afraid," he said. "Send forth the thunderbolt." Arjuna nodded, and with a swift motion he drew the mighty weapon from its sheath. The thunderbolt shone bright with an inner light, and as it was imbued with mantras, it seemed to take on a life of its own. Arjuna aimed the Gandava at the heart of the illusion, firing shafts that sliced through the air like whips. The thunderbolt's power coursed through them, imbuing them with an otherworldly energy as they struck their marks. The Navakevakas were torn apart, their forms dissolving into nothingness. The battle was over in a flash of time. Arjuna surveyed the aftermath, his eyes taking in the sea of bodies strewn across the battlefield. The horses, once panicked and frightened, now stood calm and still, as if they had been restored to their former glory by some unseen hand. Meteli smiled, his eye shining with approval. "Arjuna, your prowess is unmatched," he said. "The celestials themselves have never seen such skill in battle." As the two of them entered the city of the Navakevakas, they were met with a scene of utter chaos. The wives of the deities fled before them, their ornaments and jewels clattering to the ground as they ran. The city itself was a marvel, its walls shining with a light that seemed almost divine. Arjuna gazed out at it in awe, his mind boggling at the sheer scale of the architecture. "Meteli," he asked, "why do not the celestials reside here? This place is superior to even the city of Purandara." Meteli smiled again, his eyes twinkling with knowledge. As Arjuna continued to recount his tale, he spoke of the unearthly city of Hiranyakura, which he had chanced upon while returning from a journey. The city was a marvel to behold, with towering gates and walls made of precious jewels, and trees bearing fruits and flowers that shone like gems. It was inhabited by the Polemas and Calicantus, mighty Asuras, who were said to be invincible. Even to the gods, Arjuna's curiosity got the better of him, and he asked Meteli, his charioteer, what this wondrous city was. Meteli explained that it had been created by Brahma himself for the Calikias, a deity of family, as a reward for their severe austerities. The city was said to be impregnable, and its inhabitants were blessed with good fortune and prosperity. Arjuna's interest piqued, he decided to visit the city and put an end to the threat it posed to the gods. Meteli took him to the vicinity of Hiranyakura on their celestial chariot, and as they approached, the Asuras emerged from the city eager for battle. Arjuna was undaunted, and with his array of divine weapons, he began to fight off the Danavas. The battle raged on, with Arjuna's arrows flying swift and true, while the Danavas retaliated with their own arsenal. But despite their valiant efforts, the Asuras were no match for Arjuna's skill and strength. The city of Hiranyakura itself began to take flight, soaring into the sky as its inhabitants fled in terror. Arjuna pursued the city, his chariot racing across the firmament as he chased after the fleeing Danavas. But just when it seemed that he would emerge victorious, a terrible fear seized him. He realized that the Danavas were not ordinary foes, and that they had been granted invincibility by Brahma himself. In desperation, Arjuna turned to the god of gods, Rudra, for aid. He invoked the mighty Rudra, the destroyer of all enemies, and with a mighty roar, he unleashed his most powerful weapon. The Rudra, the very fabric of reality, seemed to shudder as the Rodra was hurled forth, unleashing a maelstrom of destruction upon the Danavas. As the Rodra tore through the battlefield, a multitude of creatures emerged from its path, each one born from the flesh and blood of the fallen Azure, as the universe itself seemed to be transformed by the power of the Rodra, as beings of every shape and form poured forth from its destruction. And in the end it was Arjuna who stood victorious, his name etched forever into the annals of history as a hero of unyielding courage and unmatched prowess. In the midst of a grand assembly, Arjuna stood tall, his words dripping with confidence. He began to recount the tale of his sojourn in Indrasikrabad, where he had been welcomed as an honored guest by the celestial king himself. As Arjuna spoke, his voice carried on the wind, echoing through the valleys and hills surrounding the Gandhamadana range. The Lord of the heavens, he said, considered me a son, and with a heart full of kindness, he bestowed upon me the celestial weapons that would make even the bravest warriors tremble with fear. Arjuna's eyes sparkled as he recounted the words of Indra, who had told him, all the celestial arms are at your command, O Bharata. No mortal on earth can match you in battle. The king's voice was like a gentle breeze on a summer day, but his words were laced with a fierce determination. As Arjuna continued to speak, he revealed that Indra had also granted him a golden garland and a mighty shield of Vedanta, which roared with a sound that could shake the very foundations of the earth. The celestial king himself had placed upon Arjuna's head a diadem, imbuing him with the power of the gods. But it was not just Indra who had honored Arjuna Sakra. The Lord of the Immortals had also presented him with unearthly garments and ornaments that shone like stars in the night sky. And so, surrounded by the children of the Gandharvas, Arjuna dwelled in the sacred abode of Indra, basking in the radiance of his new status. However, as the years passed, Sakra and the celestial host began to sense that it was time for Arjuna to return to his own world. The time has come for your departure, O Arjuna, they said, their voices like a gentle rain shower on parched earth. Your brothers have thought of you. And so, after 5 years in the abode of Indra, Arjuna bid farewell to his new friends and set out once more into the world. He knew he traveled through the valleys and hills until finally he came upon his brothers, surrounded by their enemies on the summit of the Gandhamadana range. As Arjuna approached, Yudhishthira's eyes shone with joy and wonder by good fortune. He exclaimed, you have obtained these celestial weapons by good fortune. You have been honored by Indra himself. The king's words were like a river flowing smoothly over polished stones, carrying the listeners along on its gentle current. Yudhishthira's eyes sparkled as he asked to see the very arms with which Arjuna had slain the powerful Navetakavakas. And so Arjuna promised. As night descended upon the forest, Yudhishthira, the just and righteous king, arose from his slumber. He was joined by his brothers, who shared his dedication to duty and virtue together. They performed their daily rituals with utmost devotion, seeking to purify themselves for the day ahead. When the morning sun broke through the trees, Yudhishthira approached Arjuna, his brother, and the delight of their mother, Kunti Kuntya. He said, his voice filled with reverence, show me those celestial weapons that you used to vanquish the Danavas. Arjuna, his eyes shining with the warrior's pride, nodded in response. Yudhishthira watched Arjuna seated himself on the ground, his chariot, a majestic vehicle with a mountain as its pole and beautiful bamboo trees for its axle, looked resplendent behind him. He donned his celestial armor, which shone like the sun, and grasped his bow Gandhava, along with the conch shell given to him by the gods. With a deep breath, Arjuna began to exhibit the celestial weapons, each one more wondrous than the last. The earth trembled beneath their feet as Arjuna's chariot moved, its wheels rumbling like thunder. The rivers and the sands churned with agitation, while rocks chattered, and the air grew still. The sun hid behind a veil of clouds, and fire ceased to burn. Even the Vedas, those sacred texts of knowledge, seemed to fade into silence. As Arjuna's display reached its climax, creatures from the depths of the earth rose up, their trembling bodies swaying in reverence. They surrounded the Pandavas, their hands clasped together in supplication, and begged for mercy as they were scorched by the celestial weapons. The Brahmarshis, Siddhas, Maharshis, and mobile beings all appeared on the scene, drawn by the commotion. The Devarshis, led by the most revered among them, along with the celestials, Yakshas, Rakshasas, Gandharvas, feathered tribes, and other sky-ranking beings, converged upon the forest. The great sire, the Lokapalas, and Mahadeva himself arrived, accompanied by their attendants. As they gathered, Vayu, the wind god, showered the Pandavas with unearthly blossoms that filled the air with sweet fragrance again. Harvest began to chant sacred ballads, while hosts of apsaras danced in celebration. Amidst this spectacle narrated, a celestial messenger arrived, and addressed Arjuna with gentle words, O Partha, do not discharge these celestial weapons without cause. They should only be used when there is no other option, for their missiles can bring great calamity upon the worlds. Keep them safe. In the midst of their forced exile, Janenjaya inquired about the activities of his illustrious ancestors, Pritha's sons who had returned from the realm of Indra. Vaisampayana recounted that Arjuna, the greatest of heroes, now accompanied by Dhananjaya, and the heroic twins spent their days in the pleasure gardens of Kavur, situated on a majestic mountainous. They strolled through these enchanting grounds, serving the peerless beauty of nature. Kiratai, ever vigilant and intent on battle, roamed freely with his bow in hand. The blessings of King Vaisravana had granted them a residence, and the Pandavas lived without concern for worldly prosperity. Time passed serenely as they spent 4 years. They're much like a single night. However, their idyllic existence was not destined to last forever. With Partha by their side, the sons of Pritha eventually approached King Dharmaraja. Seated before him, the wind god's son, Jishu, and the heroic twins spoke in unison their words. Like sweet nectar, we remain here solely to fulfill our promise and advance your interests, O King of the Kurus. We cannot slay Sayadhana with all his followers. While residing in this forest, it has been 11 years since we've lived in exile, and after deceiving Duryodhana, we shall easily complete our time without being discovered. Their intention was to wait for a year, then return to reclaim their kingdom, vanquishing the wicked Sayadhana and his followers. They implored Dharmaraja to descend from heaven, lest he forget his sorrow and his famed fate. Like a fragrant flower in the world of mortals and immortals alike, Vaisampayana continued. Upon hearing their resolve, King Dharmaraja, versed in Dharma and prophet, went around Kavur's abode Yudhishthira. After bidding farewell to the palaces, rivers, lakes, and Rakshasas, looked back at the path by which he had come. He then turned towards the mountain and beseeched the due greatest of mountains, may I see you again, carrying out austerities with a subdued soul. Once I have completed my task, slain my foes, and regained my kingdom. With this determination in his heart, Dharmaraja proceeded along the same path he had taken before, accompanied by his younger brothers and brahmanas. Gadhakaka with his followers carried them across mountain cascades. As they began their journey, the great sage Lomasa, like a father advising his son, went to the sacred abode of the dwellers of heaven. With Arshishna's guidance, the Pandavas ventured on alone, beholding romantic tirthas and hermitages. As the Pandavas left their happy home in the majestic mountain range, they felt a pang of sorrow. The mountains teeming with life, birds, elephants, and supernatural beings seemed to be saying goodbye to them. But as they caught sight of Kavur's favorite mountain, Kailasa, their spirits lifted. Its grandeur was breathtaking like clouds on the horizon. The Pandavas, armed with scimitars and bows, marched on, taking in the breathtaking scenery around them. They traversed through forests teeming with deer, birds, and elephants, crossed rivers, lakes, and caves, and made their way to the beautiful hermitage of Vana Parva. The king welcomed them warmly, and they spent a night in his sacred abode, frequented by gods and sages. The next morning, the Pandavas set off towards the Jujube tree called Vaisala, where they took up residence. As they reached Narayana's place, they were struck by the beauty of Kavur's favorite lake, often visited by gods and siddhas. The sons of Pandu spent a blissful time there, their sorrow forgotten, like that of Brahman sages who find solace in the Nandana gardens. After living at Baidarai for a month, the Pandavas set out towards the realm of Suva, king of the Kiratas. They traversed through treacherous Himalayan regions and passed through the lands of China to Kara, Derrida, and Kalinda, rich in precious jewels. As they entered Suva's kingdom, the king was overjoyed to see them and welcomed them warmly. The Pandavas spent a comfortable night in Suva's capital, surrounded by their charioteers, attendants, and cooks. The next day, they bid farewell to Gadhotaka and his followers, and proceeded towards the mountain monarch who dwelled near the Yamuna River. In this majestic mountain range, teeming with waterfalls, gray and orange-colored slopes, and snow-covered summits, the Pandavas found a forest resembling Chitrartha, inhabited by wild boars, deer, and birds. Dhamma, with his heart filled with distraction and grief, stumbled upon a massive snake, its hunger and ferocity almost unbearable. But Yudhishthira, the embodiment of righteousness, came to Bhima's rescue, freeing him from the snake's deadly grip. A year passed in this forest, and the Pandavas, now skilled archers, left It cheerfully bound for the borders of the desert. As they reached the banks of the Saraswati River, they entered a peaceful haven where sages and ascetics dwelled, subsisting on ground grains. Due to their toothless state, the forest was abuzz with life. Trees like the holy fig Ruvrichet and Rahatek. In the midst of a grand conversation, Janimjaya, a king with insatiable curiosity, turned to Vesampayana and asked, how was it that Bhima, the mighty warrior with the strength of 10,000 elephants, was struck with panic at the sight of that snake? You have described him as dismayed and appalled with fear, even he who had fought at the lotus lake of Kilvara and emerged victorious over Ichas and Rakshasas. I must hear this story from you, Vesampayana. A sage with a wealth of knowledge began to recount the tale as Demo roamed through King Vrisha Parva's hermitage. He stumbled upon a beautiful forest frequented by gods and Ghent. Harvest, the air was filled with the sweet songs of birds, the chagara, the chagrabake, the jibajibeka, and the cuckoo, and the scent of flowers wafted through the breeze. Vema's eyes wetted as he beheld the majestic mountains, their peaks touched by snow, and the crystal-clear streams that flowed like veins of lapis. Lazily, with his bow in hand and scimitar at his side, Vema wandered through this enchanted land, his senses heightened as he pursued his prey. He was a force to be reckoned with, capable of piercing his game with unpoisoned arrows. His strength was that of 100 elephants, and he killed many large wild boars with ease. The forest trembled beneath his feet as he strode through it, pulling out trees by their roots and breaking them with a mere touch. Vema's roars echoed through the mountains as he shouted and trampled on the tops of hills, causing the earth to resound with his war cry. His leonine shoulders rippled with strength as he struck his arms and slapped his hands in triumph. The very creatures of the forest, lions and elephants, for at the sound of his voice, yet amidst this grandeur, Bhima's gaze fell upon a serpent of colossal proportions. Its body stretched like a hillock across the cave it inhabited. Its eyes glared with an otherworldly intensity as it licked the corners of its mouth. Its turmeric light yellow collar and deep copper-colored mouth, the sight to behold as Bhima drew closer. The serpent's anger ignited, and it seized him in its grip. The mighty warrior who had vanquished countless foes was suddenly overpowered by the snake spoon-given strength. His arms, which had once equaled the might of 10,000 elephants combined, now trembled with fear as he struggled to free himself from the serpent's grasp. Janimjaya listened intently, his curiosity piqued by Vesampayana's tale. The king's eyes sparkled with wonder as he asked, tell me more. In the heart of the Himalayas, Bhima, the mighty warrior, son of Pandu, found himself bound by the coils of a serpent. The snake, whose name was Nahusha, had been cursed to take on this form for his past transgressions against the Brahmanas. As Bhima struggled to free himself, he asked the serpent about its identity and intentions. Nahusha revealed that he was once a king, the son of Aju, and a descendant of the royal sage Nahusha. He had affronted the Brahmanas, earning Agastya's malediction, which had transformed him into a snake. The curse would only be lifted when someone familiar with the mysteries of the universe could answer his questions. The Mua was taken aback by the serpent's words and realized that he was destined to become its meal. He accepted his fate, but his thoughts were consumed by worry for his brothers who had been exiled into the forest. He knew that their kingdom would suffer without him, and Arjuna, though capable of great feats, might not be able to protect them as Vema lamented his own demise. Yudhishthira, the eldest brother, sensed a calamity brewing. He noticed ominous signs, jackals, howling vultures vomiting blood, and an eerie wind blowing through the trees. His right arm twitched, and his chest shook as he felt the weight of impending doom. Yudhishthira hastened to find Bhima, accompanied by Damya, their priest. They followed Bhima's footprints into the forest, where they found signs of a great struggle. Elephant herd slaughtered, trees uprooted, and dry winds blowing through the barren landscapes. Yudhishthira approached the mountain cavern. He saw his brother motionless, bound by Nahusha's coils. The serpent, aware of its impending meal, revealed to Bhima that it was a mere vessel for destiny's will with a heavy heart. Bhima accepted his fate, and Yudhishthira prepared himself for the worst, knowing that his kingdom and family were at risk without their mighty warrior brother. The stage was set for a confrontation between life and death as two brothers faced their destinies in the unforgiving wilderness of the Himalayas. In the heart of a dense forest, Yudhishthira stumbled upon his beloved brother Vema lying coiled around the body of a massive serpent. The serpent's enormity was like that of a mountain mass, and its eyes seemed to gleam with an otherworldly intelligence. Yudhishthira approached the serpent cautiously, his voice trembling as he asked, "O son of Kantai, how did you come to this misfortune, and who is this mighty being Nahusha living in the form of a serpent Bhima?" The wounded replied, with a hint of defiance, "This serpent has caught me for food. I will not be freed unless it's by my brother's efforts." Yudhishthira's eyes widened as he assessed the situation, and he proposed to the serpent, "A long-lived one, do you free my brother from your clutches? We'll offer you another meal that will satiate your hunger." The serpent's response was both chilling and fascinating. It revealed its true identity. Nahusha, a king who had lived in a past life renowned for his sacrifices, asceticism, and mastery over the Vedas, he had been reduced to this form by Agastya, a sage of great power. The serpent's voice dripped with pride as it said, "I have not taken your brother for food. He came to my mouth willingly. You should leave now, lest you become my next meal." Yudhishthira's determination grew as he asked the serpent, "O snake, tell me truly, why did you take Vema? What will satisfy you, and what food can I offer in exchange for his life?" The serpent's response was a tale of its past life, where it had been consumed by haughtiness. After gaining dominion over the three worlds, it had insulted thousands of Brahmanas who were carrying its throne. The serpent spoke with a hint of nostalgia and longing even in this form. "I remember my former life. Agastya reduced me to this state, but I still recall the glory of being Nahusha." The serpent's words dripped with an air of resignation as it said, "I will not set them free, nor do I desire any other food. But if you answer my questions, I might spare his life." Yudhishthira accepted the challenge, saying, "O serpent, ask me whatever you wish. I'll try to answer your queries with the hope of pleasing you." The serpent's eyes gleamed with curiosity as it asked, "Who is a Brahmana? What should be known by a Brahmana?" Yudhishthira replied, "A Brahmana is one who embodies truth, charity, forgiveness, good conduct, benevolence, and mercy, that which should be known as the supreme Brahma, beyond happiness or misery." The sun was setting over the forest, casting a warm orange glow over the clearing where Yudhishthira, the wise king of the Bharata dynasty, sat in contemplation. His brother Bhimesna, the mighty warrior, had recently returned from a perilous journey, and Yudhishthira sought guidance on the path to salvation. As he pondered, the serpent emerged from the underbrush, its body coiled and ready to strike. But instead of attacking, the snake spoke in a low, rumbling voice, "Ocean of the Bharata's race, I am here to offer you wisdom. The key to attaining heaven is simple. Bestow alms on those who need it. Speak kind words. Tell the truth and abstain from causing harm to any creature." Yudhishthira was intrigued by the serpent's words and asked for clarification on the relative merits of truth and charity. The snake replied that both were essential virtues, but their importance varied depending on the situation. Truth is sometimes more praiseworthy than acts of charity, it said, and some charitable deeds are more commendable than truth speak as they conversed. Yudhishthira asked how an incorporeal being's translation to heaven, its perception by the senses, and its enjoyment of the fruits of its actions could be comprehended. The snake explained that a person's actions determine their fate in this life and beyond. The man who is not slothful, who injures no one, and who is endowed with charity and other virtues goes to heaven, it said. "But what about those who fell from their human state?" Yudhishthira asked. The snake replied that such individuals were reborn as lower animals or men, depending on the nature of their actions. "The regenerate and wise man reposes his soul in the everlasting supreme spirit," it said. "But the embodied spirit, enchained by destiny and reaping the fruits of its own actions, thus undergoes birth after birth." As the conversation deepened, Yudhishthira asked how a dissociated spirit became cognizant of sound, touch, form, flavor, and taste. The snake explained that the thing called Atman's spirit betook itself to a corporeal tenement and manifested itself through the organs of sense, becoming daily cognizant of perceptible objects. The serpent's words were like a balm to Yudhishthira's soul, and he asked for more guidance on the distinguishing characteristics of the mind and the intellect. The snake replied that the intellect was subservient to the soul, but became the director when the soul was under illusion. "The intellect does not cause sensation," it said, "but the mind does." This Yudhishthira listened intently. He realized that his guest was none other than Nahusha, a king who had fallen from. As the summer's heat began to wane, a new season emerged from the horizon. The air was filled with the sweet scent of rain, and the sky turned a deep shade of gray as clouds gathered in preparation for the monsoon. Vasavayana watched as the Pandavas settled into their temporary home, unaware of the transformation that was about to unfold. The first droplets of rain began to fall, drumming against the earth with a soothing rhythm. The black clouds, like towering fortresses, rumbled and growled as they unleashed their bounty upon the parched land. The air vibrated with the sound of raindrops hitting leaves and branches creaking, a symphony that echoed through the forest as the downpour intensified. The landscape underwent a magical transformation. The grasses and wildflowers sprouted anew, painting the earth in vibrant hues. Insects and reptiles scurried about, rejoicing in the abundance of water. The rivers swelled with excess, their waters churning and foaming as they carved out new paths through the landscape. The forest came alive with sounds of joy. Boars, stags, and birds let out their unique calls, mingling with the cacophony of frogs and peacocks. Even the skies seemed to join in as 1,000 shades of gray gave way to brilliant flashes of lightning that illuminated the darkening skies. The monsoon raged on the Pandavas, led by Dhananjaya. Arjuna wandered through the desert landscapes, marveling at the beauty of the rain-soaked world. Their footsteps were quiet on the sodden earth. As they explored the new terrain, their senses heightened by the intoxicating scent of wet soil and greenery. As the monsoon began to recede, a new season emerged from the shadows. Autumn's warmth brought a riot of color to the forest, with ganders and cranes flying overhead in the formation. The trees regained their vibrancy, adorned with leaves that rustled softly in the gentle breeze. The rivers ran clear and calm, reflecting the brilliant blue of the sky above. As night fell, the stars twinkled like diamonds scattered across the violet expanse. Myriads of planets and constellations shone brightly, casting a silver glow over the landscape. The moon, now full and radiant, cast an ethereal light upon the forest, illuminating the faces of the Pandavas as they strolled along the banks of the Saraswati River. The river itself was a sight to behold. Its waters, limpid, cool, and full to the brim with sacred energy. The canes that lined its banks swayed gently in the breeze, their delicate tips dancing above the surface. As the Pandavas bathed in the river's waters, they felt invigorated by the rejuvenating properties of the autumnal season. The night wore on, the full moon shining brightly overhead. The sun was setting over the forest of Kemika, casting a warm orange glow over the gathering of saints and sages who had welcomed Yudhishthira and his brothers with open arms. The air was filled with the sweet scent of incense and the soft chirping of birds. As the Pandavas settled into their new surroundings, as they made themselves at home, a wise old Brahmana approached them, his eyes shining with a deep understanding. Arjuna's beloved friend Krishna will soon arrive, he announced, his voice carrying on the breeze. Hari knows that you have arrived here, and he longs to see you the very moment the Brahmana finished speaking. A magnificent chariot came into view, its horses Sivya and Sugriva pulling it with ease. Krishna himself sat atop the chariot, accompanied by his beloved Satyavama, who was like Sakshi, the daughter of Pulaman, in her beauty. Krishna's eyes sparkled as he dismounted from the chariot and prostrated himself before Yudhishthira, Dhamma, and Amiya. Arjuna, with his curly hair and warrior spirit, received a warm embrace from Krishna, who was like Indra in his splendor. As they greeted one another, Subhadra, Krishna's sister, approached the gathering, her eyes shining with love for her nephews. How fortunate that my sons are safe and secure under Arjuna's protection, she said, embracing them warmly. Krishna spoke words of praise to Yudhishthira, commending his virtue and dedication to duty. You have obeyed the path prescribed by your Dharma, and as a result, you have won both this world and the next, he said. Your delight has been in charity, truth, and practice of austerities. These are the qualities that make you the virtuous king. As they sat together, Krishna spoke to Dhamya and Bhima about Arjuna's return from the forest, where he had acquired the science of arms. He praised the twins' dedication to their studies and their bravery in battle. Krishna then turned his attention to Subhadra and her sons, who were devoted to the study of the science of arms under Rukmini, his son, and Anuruddha. Your sons are being trained by a good preceptor, he said, and they will soon become skilled warriors. As the evening drew to a close, Krishna spoke to Yudhishthira about the impending war with Duryodhana and his forces. He offered to provide an army of soldiers from the Desarhat tribe, led by Balarama's plow-like whip. On Yudhishthira listened intently as Krishna outlined his plan for victory, his eyes shining with gratitude. You are our protector, Kizeva. In the midst of a dense forest, a young prince from the Hayhayas clan embarked on a hunting expedition. With his strong limbs and handsome features, he was renowned for his bravery in conquering hostile cities. As he roamed through the wilderness, his eyes scanned the landscape for any sign of game. Suddenly, he spotted what he thought was a deer donning the skin of a black antelope as its upper garment. Without hesitation, the prince drew his bow and struck down the unsuspecting figure. As The reality of his actions sank, and the prince's senses were paralyzed by grief. He hastened to the presence of the elder Haiea. Chiefs, his eyes brimming with tears. "I have committed a grave mistake," he confessed, recounting the events that had transpired. The chiefs listened intently, their faces contorted in anguish as they beheld the lifeless body of the Manai. They were consumed by sorrow and remorse, knowing that they had taken the life of a revered Brahmana. Haiea princes set out to make amends, seeking the hermitage of Arshnama, son of Kasyapa. As they approached, they saluted the great Manai, who welcomed them with kindness. The princes confessed their transgression, acknowledging that they had killed a Brahmana. Arshnama's expression remained calm, but his